Welcome to Volume 7 of Paranormal Encounters. 1 hour of ghost stories of all kinds. If you have a story you'd like to have shared with the channel, it can be submitted to reddit.com/r/slumberreads. Stay safe out there. And, as always, I hope you all have a great night. Years ago, I was living outside of Buffalo, New York, on an old estate on the Lake Erie shore. I rented the carriage house of an old mansion that a doctor and his wife owned. The doctor was a heart surgeon, and they were a well-to-do couple with multiple properties, so they weren't around that often. I liked the solitude of the place, having just gotten divorced, and although the carriage house was slightly decrepit, I loved living there. The mansion looked over the lake and my house was closer to the road, off a private drive that went from one side of the estate to the other. The carriage house had been servants' quarters for whoever lived in the mansion at the turn of the 20th century. There was an enclosed courtyard outside my door that was bordered by the back of my house, the carriage barn, which had stored carriages back in the horse and buggy days, a row of empty horse stalls, and a brick wall with an entrance into the courtyard. It was a very cool place to live. The rent was cheap, and there was a private, 150-foot beach that was hardly ever used by anybody but me. But it was very isolated if there was nobody staying in the mansion, and there weren't any close neighbors because all the houses along the road were big estates, and a lot of the rich people living in the area weren't full-time residents. But I was young and brave, and it was a big estate full of decaying spookiness. And I'm a weirdo that likes that kind of stuff, so I was overjoyed to find the place. One night, I was coming home late, around 1 a.m. from a friend's house, driving down a street a mile or two from my house. I saw a dark figure up ahead, standing close to the road. I thought that was kind of odd because it was late at night on a weekday, not exactly party time in the Buffalo South towns. I started to get a little nervous because the person was standing as if they were waiting for someone to pick them up, and as I got closer, I could see they were wearing an unusual, black, shroud-like thing, long and dark and draped, with part of it wrapped over the person's head to look like a hood, similar to someone wearing an abaya and a hijab, only much looser, like a bunch of material just wrapped around someone's body. It seemed totally inappropriate to what I knew of the people that lived in the area to see anybody wearing anything like that, and certainly not outside at 1 o'clock in the morning on a weekday. The person was just standing by the side of the road, looking stooped over and old. I slowed down to a crawl as I approached, worried that the person needed help. Maybe it was an old senile person that had walked out of their house in the middle of the night confused. When I got close enough to really see the person, she lifted her head and looked my way, and I saw that it was my ex-mother-in-law. I was absolutely, positively sure it was her. The same gray-brown hair, the same eyes, the same enigmatic smile that had always made me wonder what she was thinking about but never saying. She raised her hand and waved at me. Not a stop and help me wave, but more of a, gosh, it's good to see you wave. It scared the hell out of me. My mother-in-law had died 3 years previous to when I was driving down that road. I sped up and kept driving, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, but after a few minutes and a few deep breaths, I told myself I should go back and take another look. My mother-in-law had loved me. I couldn't imagine her ghost would appear seeking revenge on me for divorcing her son, who had not treated me well, to say the least. I drove in a square by making left turns and went down the same road again, but there was no one there. I was too freaked out to go back to my spooky carriage house with the weird sounds and 100-year-old history. With nobody there but me and the ghosts, I was convinced probably inhabited the place. So I drove to the local all-night Greek diner and sat there for an hour drinking coffee and calming my nerves. When I finally drove home and into the courtyard, I could see that something was wrong. My door was standing open. The glass windows broken. The door cracked almost all the way through from one side to the other. Someone had destroyed the door to get into the house. The next day, I found a crowbar in the courtyard, thrown off to the side. The only things I noticed missing from the house were a few pieces of my clothing. Super creepy. A jar of loose change and a knife from the kitchen. I was just divorced and not exactly rich. I didn't have much worth stealing. It's very scary when someone breaks into the house you live in all by yourself in an isolated spot. They must have driven right into the courtyard and would have been hidden from view while they broke down the door. I called the cops. They never caught anyone. With all the upset of the break-in, it wasn't until hours later that I remembered seeing my dead mother-in-law waving at me from the side of the road dressed like the Grim Reaper. I'm convinced that she somehow appeared to delay me from going home. That if I had driven straight to the carriage house, whoever the person or persons were who had broken my solid door, 100-year-old door, practically in half with a crowbar, might have been waiting there for me. Or I could have surprised them. And that things might have turned out very differently. Maybe very badly for me. Now I write fictional horror stories. I even wrote a whole ghost story novel. But this story is 100% real life true. I swear on my ex-mother-in-law's grave it really happened. You might even say that seeing my mom by the side of the road that night is part of the reason I write scary stories. So it's my recommendation that people should remember to be nice to their mother-in-law. She might help you out, even after she's dead. I had a few things happen in the duplex apartment I lived in with my sister, mom, and occasionally my mom's ex-husband when they were off and on when I was little. The first thing that happened, one night I was asleep in bed but having an awful dream. The sky was dark, blood red, and there was a lot of lawnmowers sitting around covered in blood as well. It scared me enough that I woke up, and after a few minutes of trying to decide if I should go in with my mom and sleep, I decided to try to close my eyes again. Before I could close my eyes, I saw two figures float out of my wall. One of them was a little girl with a Victorian, maybe style dress and curly blonde hair. The other was a black mask that I could tell was a man, but it had no face. I had a very intense feeling that the little girl did not want to be with the man. I could feel a fear from her almost. As quickly as they appeared, they turned and walked back into the wall. I ended up dragging my sister with me into my mom's room, where she revealed she'd seen something too, but didn't know what it was. She slept with my mom that night. The second experience in that duplex, my sister and I were sitting on the stairs. Right around the corner of the stairs was the little attic type thing that we would always find objects that had gone missing. Keys, silverware, etc. Well, while we were sitting, my sister was a step above me, sitting facing me, and we were talking. Suddenly I felt a hand on my shoulder and it gave me such a hard shove that I tumbled down the stairs and ended up with both of my eyes being blackened. After the stairs incident, my mom was frightened enough to move out of the duplex. However, I've always felt sensitive to things ever since. I always feel like I see things, and if I have my back turned in bed, I feel extremely uneasy and scared and have to face outward toward the open door. I've always wondered if something could be the cause of my severe anxiety and depression that developed during my childhood. Here's another story from Okinawa, Japan. This one was told to us by the Smith family, good friends of ours whose home also seemed to have various spirits dropping by from time to time. For purposes of this story, let's call the father Bob, the mother Sue, and their 12-year-old son Jake. One perfectly ordinary night in the Smith household, after everyone went to bed, Jake had a mysterious visitor. He was just on the edge of dropping off to sleep when he started to hear a shuffling noise in the darkness of his bedroom. As he was trying to figure out what the noise might be, someone or something unseen lay down in Jake's bed right behind him. He could feel the weight of it on the bed and the dent it was suddenly making in the mattress. Jake panicked, leapt out of his bed screaming, and quickly turned on the light. On the bed he saw nothing. There were only his normal blankets and pillows, and the dent in the mattress was gone. Bob and Sue heard Jake cry out, so they rushed down the hall to see what was the matter. Jake explained to his parents what just happened, but understandably they didn't really believe him. Bob told Jake he just had a nightmare, and Sue told him to shake it off and go back to bed. Jake was too freaked out though, and he refused to sleep in his bed. After some arguing, they finally allowed Jake to sleep on the sofa in the living room. Next night, Jake still refused to sleep in his room. Sue told him he was being ridiculous and she was determined to prove her point. "Okay, fine," she told him. "I'll sleep in your bed tonight. Nothing will happen, and then you'll have to accept that you simply had a nightmare." Jake was fine with this plan, so long as he didn't have to sleep in there again. He went down the hall to sleep next to his dad, and Sue made herself comfortable in Jake's bed. As Sue was about to drop off to sleep, she also heard something. Then suddenly, the same unseen something lay down behind her in the bed. It was exactly as Jake described it to them the night before. Sue could feel the dent in the mattress, as though another person was in the bed next to her. She jumped out of the bed, flipped on the light, and once again, nothing was there. Nobody slept in Jake's bedroom for a while after that. Not until the family's priest came over to bless the house, and especially to bless Jake's room. After that, the ghostly visitor never again tried to climb into bed with anyone in the Smith family. However, one morning Sue did walk into the living room to discover a woman in a beautiful, full kimono just standing there and staring at her. After a few awkward moments, she quickly faded away into nothingness and vanished, never to be seen again. I don't have many memories of my father, because he died when I was just 8 years old. However, I do clearly remember the night several years later when he let us know that he was still around and still watching over us. First of all, you need to know something about my father. He was fascinated by the supernatural and by the possibility of some sort of existence after death. After it became clear that he would soon lose his battle with lymphatic cancer, he told my mother not to worry. "If there's any way for me to reappear after I die to let you know that I'm okay," he said to her, "then that's what I'm going to do. I'll visit you and the kids all the time. It's going to be so cool." My mother said her response to that was a pointed and succinct, "Don't you fucking dare." It wasn't that she didn't care what happened to him after he died, or that she didn't want him watching over us. She just knew she wasn't going to be emotionally capable of dealing with that situation, and she promised him that's how she would react. My father followed through with his promise, though. The story my mother told us was that she was in their upstairs bedroom a few months after his death, thinking about him and crying because she missed him so much. Then she suddenly had the distinct feeling that she was being watched. She turned her head and saw my father standing outside the bedroom window on the balcony, clear as day. He looked healthy and alive. He was wearing a bright blue shirt, and he gave my mother a look that said, "Is it okay if I come inside?" My mother said she stared at him for a moment in total shock. She deliberately blinked her eyes to make certain that she really was seeing what she was seeing, and when she opened her eyes, he was still there, smiling and waiting. That's when my mother followed through on her promise. She closed her eyes tightly and said out loud, "I can't handle this. I'm sorry, but I need you to go away. And please don't ever do this again." After about 10 seconds, she opened her eyes, and this time he was gone. The next part of the story takes place a few years later, and I have to set the scene for you. I took a bad fall while playing soccer, and the impact totally destroyed my shoulder. I broke it in 2 places, and every ligament and tendon was torn. The reason this is important to the story is this. My shoulder hurt so bad that I couldn't easily walk up the stairs to my bedroom, which was across the hall from my parents' bedroom. I was temporarily sleeping in the guest bedroom downstairs, and my brother had the bedroom we shared all to himself. The bedroom was right above the guest bedroom. In the hallway outside the guest bedroom, there was a sideboard with shelves on top and drawers below, and on those shelves was an old mantel clock. It looked a lot like someone cut off the very top part of a typical grandfather clock, and it was small enough to fit neatly on a shelf. The clock had to be wound every so often with a special key, which was kept in one of the drawers below. And when it was properly wound, the small pendulum would swing back and forth to keep the clock going. My dad loved this clock, and while he was still alive, he made sure to wind it so that it never stopped. After his death, though, my mother never wound the clock again, and it eventually stopped. So this clock had been completely silent for years. Late one night, I was trying to go to sleep, but the pain of my injured shoulder was keeping me awake. Plus, as a kid, I had terrible anxiety. Even with the bedroom door closed to help me feel more secure, I wasn't comfortable sleeping in the unfamiliar surroundings of the guest bedroom and being the only person downstairs. Just as I was finally feeling like I might be able to sleep, I heard something in the hallway outside the bedroom door. I was immediately freaked out and wide awake because my mother and my brother were still upstairs. The stairs in this house were very squeaky, and I knew for a fact I had not heard anyone walking down them. It sounded as though someone or something was messing around with the sideboard. First, I heard a drawer open and then shut. After that, I heard a loud click, followed by a strange sort of grinding sound. Then there were a couple more clicks, and suddenly the clock that hadn't made a sound in years started ticking. The sound I had heard before wasn't grinding. It was winding. Someone took the key out of the drawer, opened the lock, wound it, and started the pendulum. Apparently, they also put the key in the drawer where it belonged, because that's where we found it later. At this point, 11-year-old me was not only wide awake, but I was also scared as hell and hiding as far beneath my covers as I could go with a broken shoulder. After all, when you're a child, covers are magical and repel all evil things, right? The next thing I heard was someone walking up the stairs. Then, everything was quiet for a short while. Soon, though, I heard footsteps moving all around over the upstairs. I even heard someone directly above me open and close the creaky sliding closet doors in my bedroom. After that, I clearly heard footsteps come down the stairs, and someone opened and then closed the door to the guest room, where I was struggling to breathe inside my deep, dark covers cave. Soon after that, the footsteps returned up the stairs, and finally all was silent, except for one thing. The clock continued with its relentless tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. Eventually, sleep caught up with me, and I didn't wake until my mother came to check on me in the morning. While we were eating breakfast that morning, my mother looked at me and paused for a long time. Finally, she asked, "Were you up and walking around last night?" I told her I was not, and then I described to her all the noises I heard. My mother told me she heard noises during the night too, and she searched all over the house to see who it was. It was her walking all around upstairs, opening and closing the squeaky closet, coming down the stairs, opening and closing the guest bedroom door, and going back up the stairs again. So who made the other sounds we both heard first? We wondered. And why was the clock ticking? Suddenly my mother's eyes grew wide. "Oh my goodness," she said. "Last night was the anniversary of the night that your dad died. I think it must have been him trying to let us know that he's still watching over us." And with that, we both went to look at the clock, which was still ticking. Tick-tock, tick-tock. "Thanks, Dad. Message received. We love you too." and we miss you. I should start by saying that while I do believe in ghosts and the paranormal, I believe there are plenty of things that can be explained once you take a step back and think with a clear mind. With that being said, there's no logical explanation that I can think of for this story. This story takes place at my old job, which is a restaurant/bar/event hall on a military base. I was there for 8 years, starting off as a dishwasher and made my way up to an admin. The building was originally built like in the 80s, but they built on from it. To the point, it's hilariously noticeable from the inside if you know what you're looking at. Now, over those 8 years, we've had plenty of employees and customers talk about how weird things happen in the old part of the building, but nothing too crazy. Like things moving slightly on their own that made you think that maybe the AC was hitting it, or feeling like someone was right behind you with how steps sounded. I've had smaller moments like that during my time there. Nothing too crazy. Though before this incident, I thought it was just in my head or something else. I realized very intensely that I was wrong one day. It was stupid early in the morning, going in at like 4, and I was in the building alone. It was the end of the month, so it was inventory time. We also had a delivery coming in at around 6. Though they have been known to show up earlier. I started inventory the day before, but my manager and I figured that I could come in early, finish up inventory, put up the image, and I could go home early. That was a deal to me because it was Tuesday. I was off Wednesday, and Thursday and Friday were holidays, so we were closed. I had all the doors open from where we stored the liquor. The old side of the building, all the way to the loading dock, on the other side of the building in the newer half. I did this so, should the driver arrive early, he would be able to find his way to me. It takes roughly less than 2 minutes to walk from the loading dock to the liquor room, if you walk at casual pace with all the turns you take to move around. I had my music blaring inside the liquor room, which was a freezer room they used in the old building, which echoed inside the room. As I was counting, I heard a man's voice clearly say, "Hello?" I had been there for roughly an hour, so I thought it was the delivery truck driver who was looking for me. I answered back and walked out looking for the driver. Except when I searched around, not only was there no delivery truck, I was still the only person there. Now you would be thinking that it must have been the music I listened to, but I was listening to some game's instrumental soundtrack, so that couldn't be it. Shaking my head, thinking I was hearing things, I just went back to count. What happened next was the first time I experienced this sense of primal fear. The room got real cold, even in the thick jacket I wore, and I was filled with a feeling of unease. Suddenly the sound of boots stomping down hard in the wooden floor came from down the hall and came towards me. It was at this fast walking pace and with a sense of purpose. I made some sort of noise as I just ducked deeper into the room, pressing against a wall. I raised a leg up and covered up my upper body with my arms as if that would do something, as those footsteps reached the door of the room and stopped. It was still cold, but once I saw that nothing was there, I bolted out the room and to my car, waiting for the next person to show up. Eventually the manager showed up and I tell her the story. She knew that I was pretty hard to startle, even with employees sneaking up on me, so when she saw the fear I had, she believed me. Plus, side is that after that, no one was allowed to be in the building alone during early morning or late morning. Cut to my 7th year there, and the newest manager coming in. We go to the old side of the building, talking about a bunch of things with another coworker. In the middle of the talk, she stops, looks off to the side, and says, "This building's haunted, isn't it?" No one told her a thing about the ghosts of the weird things that happened there. Needless to say, I'm glad I'm not in that building anymore. When I was about 11 or 12, my two friends and I had the great idea of playing with a Ouija board. The rest of the night was a mess. Before I explain what happened, here's a little backstory on the board we used. The board belonged to the sister, Dee, of one of my friends involved in this story. While she and a friend were using it, the board was put away without saying goodbye first. Whatever was talking to them that day freaked Dee's friend out enough to pretty much throw the board back into the box and close it up. I did some reading, and apparently, ending a Ouija conversation without saying goodbye can result in something either latching onto you or the board itself. We were stupid enough to use the same board. My friend Eric was invited to spend the night at my house. Being the little badasses that we thought we were, we decided we'd play with the Ouija board. Our friend Ryan lived across the street from me, so we called him to join us. We started playing and asked if there was anyone with us, if they want to tell us their name. The planchette spelled out ANDREE. Okay, cool. My middle name. At this point, I was sure that Eric was messing with me. YOUMUSTRUN. You must run. Just remembering and writing that gave me the chills. So obviously we're pretty much done talking to spirits and say goodbye. Noped the fuck out. Decided we'd go across the street back to Ryan's. At the time, the property behind his house was vacant, and a small chain link fence was the only thing keeping us from exploring, so we did. Eric's always had great intuition, and when she says we need to go, it's time to go. She started to feel uneasy being in the vacant backyard and returned to the other side of the fence. I followed. There was a growing tension in that yard. Suddenly we both got a feeling that something bad is going to happen. We start yelling for Ryan to come back over, and he thought we were freaking out over nothing. We finally convinced him to come back and started helping him over the fence to speed things up. We were chunky kids. Eric and I each had a grip on either of his arms, when we suddenly felt a lot of resistance. Ryan's hood was being pulled back by something unseen, and he was audibly gasping for air. I don't know if one of us reached to grab his hood while the other pulled him over, but we managed to get him back onto his property, and he could finally breathe. He was disturbed, and he just wanted to go back in his house for the night. Eric and I parted ways with him and went back to my house for our sleepover. We talked about what happened, but since we were kids, the situation was now funny and cool. It wasn't. Due to my past issues with sharing a bed with someone, I slept on the floor and gave her my bed. When I woke up in the morning, I had 3 long scratches on both sides of my pelvis/waist. I had slept alone. Eric couldn't have done it. It looked like deep cat scratches, but my cat was declawed. Not my choice, by the way. And I never scratched myself like that. Never happened again, but it's something I still think about to this day. So I've talked before about how my job is haunted, and I've had another experience tonight, but it actually reminded me of something I want to talk about more. See, tonight my employees all had to leave by 10:30, and we were short-staffed, so I had to finish the cleaning and paperwork. I was finishing up as midnight rolled around, and exactly as the clock hit 12, it seemed as if whatever is there in the story decided, get out or I'll kill you. Because suddenly I felt an overwhelming sense of danger and rushed out of the restaurant. This isn't a feeling I've gotten more than once before, and never from anything I can actually observe. This other experience happened on Thanksgiving 2019. Me and my fiance had moved into our apartment that summer, and we're now living in a different town. So when we left to go to her uncle's house, we ended up going through some places we've never been. The house was a fair bit away, and my fiance didn't feel comfortable driving on highways, so we were taking residential routes. I'll never forget. It was between 4 and 5 p.m. as we entered this neighborhood. The second we crossed the threshold, my eyes started to tear up, and I sank into my seat on instinct. I said without even processing it, something is wrong. Something is watching us. My fiance was concerned, but she focused on her driving, and we just kept going. We were in that neighborhood for about 7 minutes, and the whole time that feeling remained. I have no idea what it was that was haunting us. I kept scanning rooftops, looking behind us, scanning everywhere around, and I saw nothing. Every car was parked. Not a single living thing was around. Not a bird, squirrel, or a person. It was so dead, and that sense of being hunted remains. Finally, we reached the other side, and the second we left, it felt like a weight off my chest. To this day, I still have no idea what made me feel that way, and I honestly try to forget because it was so horrifying. But tonight I felt it again, and I bolted like a bat out of hell. I'm part of a paranormal team in Northern Ireland called Northwest Paranormal Research. We visit haunted locations all over the island of Ireland, but this one is probably the worst of all. We parked the cars about 500 feet from the actual house, walked up a bit of the road, then up the lane where, at the time, was all lined with a dense forest. We go inside the rundown old cottage. No power or anything here, so we set up gear. A locked-off camera and a microphone in each of the 3 rooms. We settle down in the center room where the open fireplace is. I have my laptop running, recording from all the microphones. So we settle down and do some EVPs, 3-minute bursts. In a few, we get that we think are replays, but upon amplifying it sounds like animals around the house. About 11:30 p.m., we are all sitting in our chairs having a break, coffee and sandwiches when we hear a loud bang, this from the room beside us. We all jump up and run in. With all the torches on, we look around to see what could have made such a noise, but there's nothing of such weight to do so. So in our heads we're all thinking, it's all gonna kick off now. But it doesn't. Not for another 20 minutes. It gets cold, and I mean Arctic cold. We can see our breath, yet the ambient temperature is 8 degrees Celsius. We hear little ticks, like someone throwing rice or something at us, but we can't see anything. We have 2 night vision cameras, and there's nothing showing up on those either. Then, from the laptop, we can see spikes in the audio, but we can't actually hear anything with our ears. There's definitely something going on, but we can't nail it down. Then one of us hears somebody calling her name, being whispered into her ear. Then I hear mine, but we have no recorded evidence of this. Despite having all this tech with us, we pull out a small table and a glass to do divination. And no, this is not like a Ouija board. This is a simpler form of communication. As we have our fingers on the glass, we ask out, is there anyone out there who would like to communicate? The glass immediately starts to swing violently about the table. We ask for the glass to stop, but it doesn't. We decide that it's getting a bit too intense, so we pack up and decide to leave. On our way down the lane, we were just chatting amongst ourselves about the goings-on. As we crossed the ditch at the bottom, I heard these chilling words roared at me, right into my ear. Never return. We haven't been back since. Other people have and have experienced bad things, but we will never return. Last night was the worst night of my life to date. Something happened that was so terrifying that my boyfriend and I decided to get a hotel room, which was very difficult to do because of COVID lockdown rules. We had to send my cat to my mother's place because we didn't want anyone getting hurt. It started when we had some thunderstorms roll through. My boyfriend and I really enjoy thunderstorm watching on our patio, so we went out with a cup of tea and sat and watched the storm. While we were outside, we heard knocking at our sliding glass door. We assumed it was my cat Missy, so we ignored it for a bit. It kept getting louder and louder until we finally looked to see what it was. Glass was shaking from the pressure of the knocking, but nothing was there. No cat, no person, no nothing. Just the knocking and the panes of glass vibrating. We freaked out for a bit and just stood watching the glass moving and listening to the knocking until the rain started. It was pouring so bad we had to go inside. The knocking stopped as soon as my boyfriend put his hand on the handle. We entered slowly and went into the bedroom away from the sliding doors. The bedroom looked like it had been turned upside down. The covers were torn off the bed. The nightstand was upside down. All my clothes and my boyfriend's clothes were scattered everywhere, and the cat was hiding under the bed. We cleaned up quickly and went into the kitchen to chill for a bit before bedtime. We didn't talk about what had happened because we didn't want to acknowledge it. We just tried to go about our nightly routine and go to bed. That's when all hell broke loose. We were laying in bed while I was on TikTok and my boyfriend was reading, and we started feeling really scared. My boyfriend just looked at me, and I knew he was feeling what I felt. We shifted closer together and started listening for something, anything to happen. Our cat, who was at the bottom of the bed, ran out of the room suddenly and made my boyfriend and I more uneasy. That's when we felt it. We felt the bottom of the bed press down and heard the springs compressing. We saw a large dent in the foot of the bed grow until it looked like 2 handprints and 2 knee prints, like someone was on all fours on our bed. All we could do was stare in horror as the prints started moving up towards us slowly. If we tried to get out of bed, we would have to go through whatever was there. It had moved to the point where I had to pull my legs up to my chest to avoid the prints. The prints suddenly disappeared and my boyfriend and I ran out of the room as fast as possible. We grabbed Missy and ran to the car, only stopping to grab wallets and keys. We are currently still at the hotel, and we can only afford 1 or 2 more nights. We haven't slept yet, and we are really scared to even talk about what happened. Something creepy happened yesterday at around 3:30 p.m. So my parents and me were at Disney World when my dad opened up his app to check on the front door camera. Looking at the front door, there was an extremely loud banging, and then a voice that said something we couldn't make out. The footage was live. I've never seen or heard anything like that. On the camera, you couldn't see anything though, and it was broad daylight. No one else is home. The banging was definitely more than 3 knocks. At night in my parents' bedroom, there's a back door, and around 3 a.m. sometimes they will hear knocking. Not nearly as loud as what we heard yesterday though, but I tell my parents never to open the door when they hear that because I believe that's a clear indication that a ghost is trying to enter our house. They say those knocks only come in 3 though. I get back home with my family on Tuesday late evening. Other times when I was in middle and high school, I would hear very loud banging in the middle of the night, like 2 to 5 a.m. that went on for years, up until I went to college on my window. It wouldn't happen in my sister's room, which happens to be closer to the front door, or any other room in the house that I wasn't sleeping in. If I slept in the office, it would happen there too. The only time I didn't experience that was when I'd sleep in my parents' room. It was almost like it would stop following me then. The only explanation I can say to think on this situation is that 2 of our neighbors died in the house facing front of ours. One, a wife died of dialysis when I was in high school. The other, her husband of bad health. Unsure exactly how. Happened last month. They had 2 sons. One killed himself when I was in 6th grade, but it wasn't in that house. The other one now still lives in that house with his girlfriend and 2 young children. We have a good relationship with our neighbors, but I really feel like these things may be coming from the neighbors that died across the street. We live in a dead-end neighborhood with about 30 houses. There's only 1 lane on our street. Everyone is relatively friendly and talkative. It's a very nice area. I've read up that 3 knocks means someone will die in our family, but nothing has happened. The back door knocks, my parents have been hearing this since about the end of last year. This is an experience from my childhood that I do not remember, but my mother and grandmother tell me the story like it was yesterday. My parents had me in their early 20s, and they ended up getting divorced when I was not even a year old. I often spent the nights at my grandma's house, my mother's mom, since my mom had little money at the time. When I was about 1 to 2 years old, I would come out of my room and tell everyone how there's a lady that used to stand over my crib at night and watch me sleep. Since I was so little, everyone thought I was just making up stories. It was my imagination, or I was dreaming. This continued on for months, if not a year. Every night I would tell my mom, "Mom, the lady that stands over my crib at night said this and that, blah, blah, blah." One day my mom and grandma were looking through a photo book. As they were flipping through pages, she lands on a photo of my dad's mom. I pointed to her and said, "Mom, that's the lady that stands over my crib at night." I had never met her, and she had died years before I was born. After that, I have experienced seeing my late relatives numerous times. I do not have a gift, nor do I consider myself able to see/communicate with the dead. I believe I have guardian angels that check up on me, and I happen to catch them at the right time. When I was 23, I used to run the youth theater at a local theater royale. It was an old building from the Georgian period, at least Baroque, 1700s, etc. It was beautiful, dark green and red with great facades and that lovely musty theater smell. I could spend all my time there happily, but I hated being there alone, which I often was to prepare shows or set up for my session. There's a lot of prep that goes into a show. I had a key so I could let myself in, and if no one could meet me, I would have to do this alone. It would take me a lot of courage to go alone, I can tell you. Anyway, the foyer was fine. It was renovated and new and fresh, and nothing ever happened in there. It felt welcoming and modern. Upstairs in the old bar was a bit different, but nothing too bad. This was on the first floor. Second, if you're American. I still didn't like being in the old bar alone, but thankfully it was only used for meetings, so I rarely was. The third floor? Forget about it. This was where the tech room was kept. A small 2-person room that was permanently boiling hot from the equipment. Except when it wasn't. The room had been the tech room since the age of literal gas spotlights. And Jeff, the tech manager, was certain the gaslight technician enjoyed his job so much that he never left. He would often be up there, apparently, in the boiling hot tech room, and it would suddenly turn as cold as a freezer. Tech would malfunction and crew members would laugh it off and blame old equipment and damp. Jeff and I knew better. In front of the tech booth was the raked balcony of chairs, and one of them was permanently kept down. This chair, right in front of where Jeff looked out to see the stage whilst doing his job during a show, was reserved for Abigail. It was taken as read that if that chair was ever up, Abigail would mess with the theater. Even the cleaners left that chair down, and it permanently had a reserve sign taped to it. Someone once said a theater is not a theater without ghosts. I don't know what it is about them. Perhaps the intense range of emotions actors have to portray and audiences feel creates a spiritual vacuum. Almost every theater has at least one ghost. Theater Royal had at least 3, and not all of them were as friendly as Abigail. So when going around and setting up, then I had to walk through the auditorium to get to the dressing rooms and the rehearsal rooms, etc. Even with all the lights on, it was always just dim and cold. I always had an overwhelming feeling when walking to the backstage area that I shouldn't turn around and look up to the balcony. Abigail was waiting. I would sing loudly to keep myself calm, all the show tunes I could think of. I'm not a great singer thanks to larynx polyps, but It was enough to keep me calm. I was usually so lost in my to-do list that I could fight the overwhelming urge to look up at that seat. Then, one day, whilst painting the flats for our production of Wizard of Oz, I suddenly forgot all of the words to Defying Gravity, my go-to song for keeping calm. Before I knew what was happening, I had turned around and looked up at the balcony because I felt compelled to. I couldn't fight it anymore. It was like Abigail was calling to me. And there, unsurprisingly, was a woman in Victorian garb sitting patiently in the top right of the balcony on the seat that was always kept down for her. She didn't do or say anything. She didn't move, and I nervously smiled at her and went back to my painting. She wasn't a threat, and she was clearly watching me being the old stage to life. Our youth theater productions were always anticipated due to their brightness. Abigail seemed to think so. She liked my singing according to the theater managers who were quite familiar with her. After that, I made a point of saying hello to her when I went into the auditorium. She never said anything, but I knew she was always there. That's the first ghost. The friendly theater goer happy to keep me company. She was only ever in the auditorium and rarely moved from her seat. The backstage area was okay. Always freezing, but okay. It was only the boys' dressing room that gave me the heebie-jeebies. It was the smaller dressing room, and we only used it for the boys because we had only 3 versus the 10+ girls in the bigger dressing room. I hated being in there alone and would sing even louder when setting up costumes and makeup for rehearsal or using the small cubicle toilet. Even with the door closed, I always felt someone behind me in the hall. And I always expected the door to burst open. It never did, and I think that's in part to do with the mirror facing the door. There's an old superstition that mirrors reflecting an entrance will keep spirits out. I still never spent longer than I needed to in there. The other dressing room was fine, just something about the boys. I wonder what it used to be before it was made a dressing room in the new refurb of the back. Whoever haunted that corridor and the stairwell wasn't malevolent, I don't think. I just always expected them to just appear, and I didn't want that to happen when I was alone, thank you very much. And then there was the basement. The basement was where the props were kept, and it was underneath the stage and ran beneath the street and the auditorium. It was the oldest part of the theater, the only bit that had never been updated over the 300 years since the theater was built. It was beyond unwelcoming. What is it about basements? To get down there, I would have to go through a fairly large and heavy trapdoor in the wings of the stage. I would hook the door on the designated ties to keep it open, and then head down to gather the props we needed for rehearsal. And let me tell you, descending beneath the ground was terrifying. The silence, the must, the damp. I never sang because it always echoed unnaturally. It was behind another locked door that I had a key for, and the light switch was quite far inside. You'd have to go in a few meters in the dark before you could turn on the light, and it was quite old and blinked as it turned on like a literal horror film. So many times I've been down there and seen shadows whilst the light was warming up, and I always felt like someone was behind me. The basement used to be the dressing rooms back in the Victorian era, so there's lots of different rooms and corridors leading to different rooms. One of the rooms didn't even have a floor. It was just dirt, and I hated that little room. I think everyone did because no props were ever stored there. I don't know if there was a specific spirit in the basement, or if it was just all the emotions from all the performances gone by, but I didn't spend more than I needed to down there. And there was the one time the trapdoor slammed shut behind me. The slam terrified me so much I literally screamed for perhaps the 4th time in my whole life. I've always been pretty calm in dramatic situations, but I hated the idea of being trapped down there. Even though the trapdoor didn't lock, it had slammed despite being firmly on the hooks. I dropped the props I was holding literally on the floor and hurried to try it, and thanking all the gods I could open it again. There was no one else in the theater, and it was about half an hour until the kids started rolling in for rehearsal. But I didn't go down there alone after that. I got the kids to help me bring up props. I wonder if the spirit who slammed the trapdoor is the same one who lurked outside the boys' dressing room. They were quite close together. The worst part? I think I know what caused the temper tantrum. The ghost light had gone out. Those who have done drama or theater their whole life will know most of the superstitions that come with the tradition, especially where theater ghosts were involved. Don't whistle because you may piss them off. Don't be up on the gantry alone in case they like playing tricks. A quick Google will bring them all up, or I may post some more traditionals in the comments. Anyway, a ghost light is a light in a theater that is permanently left on so that the ghost can feel welcome and won't mess with the performance. In Victorian theater, it was a literal bare gas light left in the middle of the stage and was the last thing lit when leaving and locking up after a show. Modern theaters tend to have a green glowing LED somewhere backstage that's not as expensive to run or distracting for the performers. The idea is most theater ghosts were once performers, and a ghost light means they can perform when everyone has left. It's one of the taken for read traditions, like not saying Macbeth. Anyway, the day the trapdoor slammed shut, I realized after rehearsal finished that the bulb on the ghost light had gone, and I didn't know how to replace it. I hightailed it out of there once the kids had left, leaving all the lights on, and texted the theater manager. I didn't feel any more malevolence after it was replaced later that day. Like I said, theaters are superstitious and haunted places. Abigail didn't seem to mind that the light had gone out. So I've had a lot of paranormal experiences ever since I was young, as I'm quite sensitive to these sorts of occurrences, as passed down by my mom. But this is one I genuinely feel lucky to have experienced. I would have been 13 to 14 at the time. Quick layout of the house. You walk in the front door. If you keep walking straight, you end up in the kitchen. If you turn right, lounge room. Turn left and there is a long hallway with 2 bedrooms on the left and a bathroom and 1 bedroom on the right. So this particular night the whole family, mom, dad, sister and me, were on the couch watching TV, facing the hallway. As I'm just glancing off down the hallway, I see a little boy run across from one room to the next. There was no sound of footsteps, but I could hear a cheeky, childlike giggle which only I had heard. I got my mom's attention and told her that there was a young boy running in the hallway and began to describe his light brown hair as it bounced with each step. His sporty shorts and shirt and his cute little sneakers. Mom starts to get a bit weird and gives Dad the look of, should we tell her? They decide they'd rather not keep me in the dark, luckily for me. My mom then begins to tell me that she sees him too. His name is Joe, and that he is my little brother. I'm so confused as it had only ever been just my sister and I. She confessed she had a mid-late term miscarriage a couple years after I was born, and she said that this is who we're seeing. We have learned a lot about Joe over the last few years. He likes to follow me around and tug my shirt to remind me he is there. He has also told us that he gave up his life because he was to be born with major disabilities that my family wouldn't be able to deal with. So he moved on to give us a chance of a life without the struggle. I can't imagine what my mom went through losing a child, but it has to bring some sort of comfort to know he is still around. If anyone has any opinions or info on aging in the spirit world, feel free to share, as I would love to know more. This is a true story. My friend, we'll call him Jeff, thinks we encountered a ghost. I'm not convinced, but it would be a great discussion. Enjoy. One year a friend of mine had taken me to an abandoned house on the outskirts of town. He gave me this creepy backstory about how a family had lived there in the early 80s. They were very reclusive and often described as strange and unwelcoming. The 2 children, a boy and a girl, similar in age, early teens, were described as having bleached blonde hair, sad eyes, and being nonverbal. The family lived in the house for less than 2 years when they just mysteriously picked up and left. They boarded the house up tight, and unknown persons continued to replace the boards covering all the doors and windows, and no one had moved in since. Upon telling me the story, I called Jeff out on his obvious BS. He gave me an eerie look before smirking and darting beside the house, into the backyard of the property. It was after midnight, and an overcast sky made the night darker than usual. A tiny sliver of light illuminated the ruins before me. It had snowed for a week prior, but now we were experiencing spring-like temperatures. In Canada, we can see all 4 seasons in one day. I laughed quietly and hastily followed his footprints in the melting snow. As I got close to the corner of the house, I quietly called out Jeff with no response. I assumed he was trying to scare me, so I crept as close to the side of the house as I could, in an attempt to jump out and scare him instead. As I rounded the corner, I was grabbed from the side, a hand around my mouth. I struggled for a second before I realized that Jeff was holding my mouth closed. In the very dim light, I could see his eyes were wide and wild. I saw someone run through the trees. I pulled out of his grasp. I didn't believe him. Obviously, he was just trying to scare me. No, really. I came around the corner and I saw this big shadow run into the trees. I heard it. I looked at the smooth snow on the ground. No footprints. I smiled and puffed my chest, walking toward the tree line. "Hello?" I shouted. Jeff reached out for me again. "Shut up, I'm not kidding." I saw nothing. Heard nothing. Whatever. Let's check out the house. The house itself was boarded up well. You'd need tools to break through the doors or windows, but the elements had not been kind to the house. The year prior, a tree had fallen, a large limb taking out the corner of the house. Now we could freely gain access. Entering the back of the house, you have to step onto an elevated deck. There is nothing bordering the crawl space, just a vast, dark abyss that raises up to knee level. I only mention this because I felt very exposed and vulnerable while standing beside the porch. The back corner of the house leads to the sunroom. When I entered, I immediately saw a stove tipped over on its side in the middle of the room. This clearly wasn't the kitchen. There was nothing else in the room. Just the stove. Suspicious. We walked through the main level of the house. Everything was covered in inches of dust. We weren't distinctly looking for any proof of activity, but nothing stood out as something was here recently. The house had multiple metal desks from the 80s. The ones where the chair is attached and you have a small desk surface over one armrest. Inside one of the desks was a burn spot and 3 long white candles, partially burned. In another room, all of the wallpaper looked as if it had been involved in a huge fire. The walls beneath are also charred and smoke-stained. Oddly enough, the floor and ceiling seem relatively untouched by the flames. Filthy, but not burned. There was nothing of much interest on the main floor. 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, living room and kitchen, and of course the sunroom. As we were on our way out of the house, curiosity got the best of me. I walked over to the overturned stove to find that it was purposely placed there to cover the entrance to a basement. Jackpot. I excitedly motioned to Jeff to help me push the stove aside. I flashed the light on my phone down into the dark, misty hole. The first 3 steps were completely destroyed, and there was broken glass littered around the floor's opening. But if I knew we could get down there if we were careful, it was getting back up that would be difficult. Let me just preface by saying that the way the stove was laying, it was perfectly blocking our view of the room from inside the basement opening. So if someone was standing anywhere in that room, the same as the entrance to the house, we would never see them. The moment we got into the basement, I felt funny. Jeff said he felt odd right when I was thinking the same thing. We walked around the basement for a while. It was larger than we expected, and consisted of 3 rooms. The obvious basement crap was thrown around. Old metal pipes, tin cans, old bed frames. an old furnace. We were entering the final room in the basement, the one furthest from the entrance, when Jeff and I heard a very loud slam coming from upstairs. It sounded as if a book had just been thrown against the floor. Jeff and I had been laughing loudly, but now we were silent, our flashlights off, crouching in absolute darkness, just listening. Minutes went by. We heard nothing. We both laughed at each other and made jokes. We finished our search, and were on our way to the entrance when we heard an aggressive metal on wood screech from directly above us, and it was undeniable, as if one of the metal desks upstairs was forcefully pushed across the room. Now Jeff and I knew it was time to act. We scavenged some metal framing and ran to the entrance, weapons drawn. We were cautious while climbing up the broken stairs, but nonetheless, we held our courage and we stormed the main floor. No one was there. The desk had not been moved. There were no drag marks on the floor, as if nothing had ever happened. At this point, Jeff and I decided it was time to leave. We sprinted through the house, me leading the way. As I ran outside, I saw a shadow dart out from the corner of my eye and run toward the tree line. I didn't bother telling Jeff, telling myself it was just a trick of the light. Regardless, I didn't know what was going on. I wanted out of there. When we were what we thought to be a safe distance from the house, we looked at it for a while and laughed again. After a moment, Jeff fell quiet. He stared intently at the house. "I feel like I'm being watched," he said. Moments later, we heard another loud slam from within the house. Jeff and I left, finally. A couple years later, the house was demolished. I was never able to return again, but I would have liked to have gone at least one more time. But I still love telling this story around campfires. What do you think happened?